Welcome to the Jaime Luce podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. We are talking today about winning the battle that you're afraid to fight. I hope that you'll stay with me today. I'm going to really plow through this because there's a lot of material here. So if you can get your Bibles, get your notepads and your pens ready, you're going to want to take some notes. I think we're going to be speaking about Gideon. And I know everyone thinks they know the story of Gideon, but I want to bring some fresh things to you today. I hope that you will not just approach this by, yeah, I've heard that story, I know that story, but I want you to be able to take this and make it personal and use what that's what the word is for us to take it and apply it to our lives and make it have power in our lives because it has the power to do it if we will take it, if we will make it our own. I wanted to kind of find out if you're like me, because if you're anything like me, you've had battles to face. And if you're anything like me, you've had battles that scare you a bit. And there are some battles that scare us more than others. And for whatever reason, they just seem to hit closer to home. Maybe they require more of us. Maybe they strike a nerve in us. Maybe you've had to fight the kind of battle that you've already fought that kind before, and you're a bit battle weary because you've had to fight that one before, and maybe you feel unqualified today, or maybe you haven't served the Lord very long, so you think you just aren't spiritually equipped yet. You're just not enough yet. You haven't grown enough in the Lord, and you don't know how to deal with this. Maybe you're just afraid of the fight, afraid of the unknown, afraid of the outcome, afraid of what you might lose or what it might cost you. Well, if you fit into any of those categories today, I want to encourage you and strengthen you. You are able. You are cut out for this thing that you face. You are handpicked to bring about a great victory. And I'm going to show you how to not just get through this process, but come out of it victorious. It is a process. Many times we don't recognize this process because we know there's a battle going on around us. We just don't recognize yet how that has affected us. And all we know until this begins is that we don't have any peace. We're very uncomfortable. We find ourselves going through what I like to call, and what you've probably heard before, as a threshing process. And we're taking a little bit of the pictures of the story to be able to explain what's going on in Gideon's life. But just to summarize for you, Gideon in his beginning he feels everything that we just talked about, everything we just mentioned. He feels probably all of those things. And he finds himself in the wine press and he's threshing wheat. So the picture is that he's in a pressing place. He's in the wine place, the place of crushing. And while he's in the place of crushing, he's being threshed. He's threshing. And not thrashing, though they're similar, but threshing. But this process is very important. So, what is the threshing process? If you are wondering what you're feeling right now, I'm going to explain this and maybe it will help a little bit. First, it is the process of separation. To thresh is to separate something. It is a violent shaking process that is followed, sadly, by this beating process. You could look this up. You can Google this and watch someone do this on YouTube. And it's still a practice that some places do it today. But it is this process that causes separation. Its purpose is to separate. And it is separating the grain, the good, the usable, the prosperous part of the plant, from the grip of that which has held it captive. So its purpose can be fulfilled. It is separating the grain from the stalk, from the chaff. And the chaff is the part that is unusable. It has no purpose after the growing process. It's there, of course. At first, it's a protection over that grain while it's growing, but it becomes unnecessary. If you kind of think of it this way, if you were building a building And there is scaffolding. You have to put up scaffolding so that you can put the building up and build up. But once the building is up, you don't leave the scaffolding there. You remove the scaffolding. It is now a hindrance and it's in the way. And that's really what this threshing process is, that in our growing and in our circumstances, there is a separation happening. You might feel separation from people. You might feel separation from an old way of convenience, of things that they used to be this way and they're not this way anymore. It might actually be a battle and you feel the separation of loneliness, that you feel alone in your battle and you're separated from people. What if there is a disagreement going on or trouble in relationship, and you feel a separation from people that matter to you? So let's talk about this, because if you feel like you've been in the threshing process, I have good news for you. You are not alone, and God will bring you out of that process, out of that wine press, and into great victory. So let's turn in our Bibles to Judges 6, and we're going to see how God shows us the making of a warrior. This may be a familiar text to you, like I mentioned, but in case you're new to the Lord or you haven't read this story in a while, we will be talking about Gideon's process. For some context, the Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord handed them over to the Midianites for 7 years. And every time the children of Israel would plant their crops, the Midianites would come and steal the harvest. That's why we find Gideon hiding in the winepress. He's hiding because these are enemies of theirs who come and rob and take all of their harvest. So the children of Israel began to cry out to the Lord for help, and through the prophet, the Lord said, I brought you out of Egypt, rescued you from the Egyptians who had oppressed you, and drove out your enemies, and gave you their land. I told you that I am the Lord your God. You must not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now live, but you have not listened to me. And this is a side note. I'm not going to stay long on this, but this is something we need to understand, folks. That God has ways. And I've talked about this before. We've talked about this before. God has ways. And I know you know that. I'm sure you're learning that there are things that you see that's the way God operates. But when he gives us an instruction and tells us to separate, and we don't separate, whether that's the way the world does it, whether that's being unequally yoked with friendships, whether that's in business dealings, I mean, goodness, it can be the gamut of so many things. But when we don't do it the way God tells us and separate when he tells us, a threshing has to come. A separation has to come. He said to them very specifically, do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now live. We now are bombarded by every kind of thing to worship in the Western world. And all over the world, really, there are still plenty of gods being worshiped that are false gods all over this world. And we have to recognize that God has said, you may not serve those gods. You must separate yourself to me only. You must serve me only. But if we don't do that, there is a price to be paid. There are consequences. He's not telling us that because he's mean. He's not telling us that because he's mad at us. He's not telling us that to box us in. He's doing it to protect us, to take care of us, to bless us. So sometimes inadvertently, we find ourselves in the threshing. So we're going to set the stage here a little bit. So there's already a battle going on, but there isn't much resistance to this battle. I mean, the children of Israel are not really fighting back the Midianites. They've been handed over to them, and they're just kind of living with them. They're now serving their gods. The Lord has heard the cries, though, of those who are still looking to him for help, because now it's affecting how much they eat. They're starving because of this process. And the answer to their prayer begins with the angel of the Lord coming and speaking to Gideon, who is hiding in the winepress, in that place of crushing, threshing his wheat. So we're in Judges chapter 6. I'm starting with verse 11. Then the angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the great tree of Ophrah, which belonged to Joash of the clan of Abiezar. Gideon, son of Joash, was threshing wheat at the bottom of a winepress to hide the grain from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "Mighty hero, the Lord is with you." "Sir," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us?" Have you not, I'm just stopping there for a minute. Have you not heard that or said that yourself? If God is, folks, I've said it. God, if you're with me, why? Why? Why is this happening? I know we've all been there, folks. I I'm here to encourage you, not to browbeat you, not to make you ashamed of the situation you find yourself in, even if you got yourself there. We all have this cry in our heart when we don't understand what we're going through. And Gideon was no different. I'm sure we can find ourselves in this very story. He said, "Why is all this happening to us? And where are all the miracles our ancestors told us about? Didn't they say the Lord brought us up out of Egypt, but now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites?" Then the Lord turned to him and said, "Go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you." Go in the strength you have. You do have some strength, and you're going to go forward in the strength that you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you. So this is a command. The Lord is commanding him. "But Lord," Gideon replied, "how do I rescue Israel?" It's like, how do I get us out of this mess? How am I going to do this, God? How? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family. I mean, have you ever felt that way? The Lord said to him, "I will be with you." And he'll say this to you too. He is with you. He will go with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man. I mean, God's telling him, you're going to have such a great victory that it's like you're fighting only one man. That's pretty powerful. I mean, he's not just saying, "I'm going with you." He's telling him, this is going to be easy for you. If you'll do what I tell you to do, if you'll really do this, this isn't going to be hard. I will go with you, and I'm sending you in the strength you have. You do have it in you. You do have it in you. Gideon replied, "If you are going to help me, show me a sign to prove that it is really the Lord speaking to me." So he perceives this is the Lord. He sees an angel. He perceives this is the Lord. He's not sure. He's asking for a sign. I mean, don't we do that? "Lord, I think that you saying that to me. I think this is what you're telling me to do. Can you just show me a sign so I know for sure?" And he says to him, "Don't go away till I come back and bring my offering to you." And he answered, "I will stay here until you return." The Lord is so faithful. He stands right with us. In our previous broadcast, in our last episode, we talked about how God he never leaves us. He never forsakes us. He never turns his back on us. His heart is always for us. He's always present. And he's letting Gideon know, "I'm right here." Verse 19, Gideon hurried home. He cooked a young goat, and with a basket of flour, he baked some bread with yeast. Then, carrying the meat in a basket and broth in a pot, he brought them out and presented them to the angel who was under the great tree. The angel of God said to him, "Place the meat and the unleavened bread on this rock and pour the broth over it." And Gideon did as he was told. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and bread with the tip of the staff in his hand, and fire flamed up from the rock and consumed all that he had brought, and the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he cried out, "Oh, sovereign Lord, I'm doomed. I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." This made me laugh when I read it because, first of all, it's like, "Oh, prove to me it's you." And then when it is God, he's terrified. "Oh my gosh, I'm doomed because I've seen the Lord." And God says, "It's all right," the Lord replied. "Do not be afraid. You will not die." And Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and named it Yahweh Shalom, which means the Lord is peace. The altar remains in Ophrah in the land of the clan of Abiezar to this day. Don't you love it? First, Gideon's terrified of the Midianites. Then he's terrified that the angel of the Lord has spoke to him. He has also no self-esteem. He doesn't believe in the position of himself or his family. It doesn't matter where you come from. And if you think you are the worst of the worst, it doesn't matter. That was Gideon. God never sees us how we see ourselves. You think you're not qualified for this. You think you can't bring victory because you are disqualifying yourself. And I'm telling you, none of that stuff matters. As we'll see, Gideon always wanted to be sure before acting, which is a good thing. He's wanting to make sure that he's hearing God right, but he's in fear and trepidation always. He was afraid he didn't hear God right. I have been there so many times. God, is this you? I'm not sure that's you. I'm afraid to move. Fear, the spirit of fear tries to come in so much that we're afraid to even do what we know God is calling us to do. We have to step out in faith. God honors our faith. If you believe God has spoken to you and you know that's not you talking to you, you know the devil wouldn't ask you to do that. He's not going to tell you to go fight the enemy. You can be assured God is on your side. He's with you. He's not going to leave you alone. He's going to help you. We try to talk ourselves out of when we hear God. We think that wasn't God talking to me. I must be crazy. Why would God call me to do anything? On and on we have our excuses. But let me give you a picture to help you see this. My son served in the Army. And the minute you sign up, it no longer matters who you are, who you were. You are now property of the United States government. What you eat, how much you eat. If you sleep, how much you sleep, where you sleep. What you do, who you're with, where you go, how you do it, everything, all of it is determined for you. Everything it does not matter who you were. It doesn't matter who your parents were. It doesn't matter where you came from, what state you came from. You are now where they're telling you to be, when they tell you to be there. Everything about your life is now under their command and their control. You are assigned a drill sergeant. His job is to make you into a soldier who is fit for battle. During your basic training, you will be torn down. In our last episode, we talked about how there is a time for everything, and there is a time to tear down, but then there's a time to build up. So they tear you down so that you can be built back up into a soldier. I like to think of this as the threshing process. You are removed from everyone you know, every comfort zone you had, and any control you once had over yourself or allowed others to have over you is now removed. That is the chaff. Then you are beaten small. Now, I know this sounds severe, folks, but when you're in the process, you feel like it's beating you up. You get this. You know what this feels like, and you think, will it ever end? You're beaten. The beating process that takes place, though, is necessary to remove the chaff. It's done until all the old is out and you are ready to receive all of the new, until the only thing left is what's useful. Do you hear that? You think you are going to die, but the truth is you are being prepared so that you won't die. That's the whole point, so that you won't die. You are, in fact, being made ready to conquer, to be a victor, a champion. God was acting like Gideon's drill sergeant. The first thing God dealt with in this transformation was his self-image. We must be willing to see ourselves as God sees us and be willing to throw out all the excuses. You cannot remain in self-pity or self-degradation. Listen, God isn't wrong. He is the creator of the universe. He formed you in your mother's womb. He knew you before you were even an idea. Or are not an idea at all, a surprise. He knows how he made you and what he made you for. He knows what's in you. He put it there. And he knows exactly how to bring it out of you. You cannot continue thinking that you know better than God. You cannot go on speaking about yourself and your circumstances as if you know what God has in store, as if your story is already finished. 1 Corinthians 2:9 says, no eye has seen and no ear has heard and no mind has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. He has a great plan for you. Jeremiah 29:11. He knows the plans he has for you to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you a hope and a future. God has a great plan that he's going to use to bring you out. But the way to bring you out and to bring out what is valuable and usable in you is to allow you to go through the threshing process, which is what God did with Gideon. He threshes us for his purpose. He takes what the enemy meant for evil and he turns it for good. And all that you have gone through or go through or went through, God can now use to take you through. We don't realize he is teaching us to use what we have learned during the threshing. But to complete this work, it takes an altar. God tells Gideon to build an altar. In other words, make a place of prayer, which he does.
Hi, my name is Jaime Luce. I wanted to share with you some information about a brand new book entitled You Don't Need Money, You Just Need God. It's a playbook for miraculous provision. And I want to share it with you because it solves the problem we are all facing right now. The economy is going crazy, gas prices are soaring, there's wars and rumors of wars. We've got everything hitting us all at once with interest rates rising. You need to know what to do. And so many times we think we need the money, but you don't need money. I'm telling you, the answer is you need God. And that's exactly what we want to teach you through this book. We'll give you practical ways to know what to do and how to do it so that you get answers now. You can find my book on Amazon. You can also go to jamieluce.com. You can also find this book at youdon'tneedmoney, youjustneedgod.com. This book is available today.
The name Gideon gives to this altar that he's built is Yahweh Shalom. The Lord is peace. So Gideon understands that what God is wanting to do is to remove the war and the fighting and the battles and the trouble and bring them into a place of peace. And he wants to use Gideon to bring about that peace. Folks, God wants to use you. He wants to use you to bring about the peace that's necessary in your life and in the lives of those around you. Gideon began to get the revelation that God wanted to use him to defeat that enemy of fear and bondage and live in peace. And that's what God wants for you too. Verse 25 of where we had picked up reading, it says, that night the Lord said to Gideon, take the second bull from your father's herd, the one that is 7 years old. Pull down your father's altar to Baal. So his father was serving false gods, and cut down the Asherah pole standing beside it. Then build another altar. Build an altar to the Lord your God here on this hilltop sanctuary, laying the stones carefully. Sacrifice the bull as a burnt offering on the altar, using as fuel the wood of that Asherah pole that you just cut down. God is basically saying to him, Gideon, the house is out of order, and people are doing things they're not supposed to be doing. Get your house in order. Tear that nonsense down. Tear down the false gods you're serving. Don't carry on those old family traditions that are actually curses in your life. There are so many things that we need to deal with in our life, and we don't realize we've got to look back that we're doing things just because that's what's always been done. We don't know why we're doing them. We don't know why we're in the mess we're in. We're in the same mess as our families have been in. And it's time for us to break out of that. And God says, you got to deal with this. You got to cut that stuff down. There's an old country song, and I'm dating myself, but this song was sung by, did I write down his name? I'm forgetting his name. Is it Merle Haggard? It might be Merle Haggard. Anyway, it's an old country song. And the name of the song is It's a Family Tradition. I want you to hear this. This is really comical because this is what's sad. This is how so many are living. And it says, country music singers have always been a real close family, but lately some of my kinfolks have disowned a few others in me. I guess it's because I kind of changed my direction. Lord, I guess I went and broke their family tradition. So he's not living the way some of them are living. They get on to me and want to know, Hank Williams Jr. Sorry, it's Hank Williams Jr. They get on to me and want to know, Hank, why do you drink? Hank, why do you roll smoke? Why must you live out the songs that you wrote? Over and over, everybody makes my prediction. So if I get stoned, I'm just carrying on an old family tradition. I am very proud of my daddy's name, although his kind of music and mine ain't exactly the same. Stop and think it over. Put yourself in my position. If I get stoned and sing all night long, it's a family tradition. So don't ask me, Hank, why do you drink? And Hank, why do you roll smoke? Why must you live out the songs that you wrote? If I'm down in a honky tonk and some old slick's trying to give me friction, I say, leave me alone. I'm singing all night long. It's a family tradition. Lordy, I have loved some ladies and I have loved Jim Beam, and they both tried to kill me in 1973. When the doctor asked me, son, why did you get in this condition? I said, hey, Sawbones, I'm just carrying on an old family tradition. So don't ask me, Hank, why do you drink? And Hank, why do you roll smoke? Why must you live out the songs that you wrote? Stop and think it over. Try to put yourself in my unique position. If I get stoned and sing all night long, it's a family tradition. Folks, it's time that we tear down these old family traditions. It's time that we tear down the things that have not worked and have been a snare and a trouble to us. And it's time to build back the altar of prayer to the Lord. It's time to tear down those things, burn them down, give God your all. It's time to go past the point of no return, just like the children of Israel did when they crossed the Red Sea. There's no going back. And for Gideon, it was burning down his father's idols to build back carefully. God said, take those stones and build this carefully. So we've got to follow those instructions. We need to serve God with all our mind, our body, our soul, our strength. Let's read Judges 6, verses 25 to 31. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord had commanded, but he did it at night because he was afraid of the other members of his father's household and the people of the town. So he's still doing he's doing it, but he's doing it afraid. He's still afraid, but he's doing it afraid. Early the next morning, as the people of the town began to stir, someone discovered that the altar of Baal had been broken down and that the Asherah pole beside it had been cut down. In their place, a new altar had been built, and on it were the remains of a bull that had been sacrificed. The people said to each other, "Who did this?" And after asking around and making careful search, they learned it was Gideon, the son of Joash. "Bring out your son," the men of the town demanded of Joash. He must die for destroying the altar of Baal and for cutting down the Asherah pole. And you might get attacked too. When you're trying to make the right decisions to get victory in your life, people will come out and stand and hurl accusations at you and try to keep you in that family tradition. But Joash shouted to the mob that confronted him, "Why are you defending Baal? Will you argue his case? Whoever pleads his case will be put to death by morning. If Baal truly is a god, let him defend himself and destroy the one who broke down his altar." From then on, Gideon was called Jerub-Baal, which means let Baal defend himself, because he broke down Baal's altar. The first battle was very important. God told Gideon to go in the strength he had and that God would be with him. Obeying God and believing God led to this first victory. Even though he still had fear, he did it afraid. Twice more, Gideon asks for a sign. That's the fleece. And I'm not going to take the time to read all that. But God answered his request and then tells him to prepare an army. We won a battle or two, and we even have gained some confidence. So I'm talking about myself. I'm talking about you. I'm talking about people in general. We go and we deal with a few things. We win a few small battles. We start to gain our confidence back. People start to know us by our victory. And this is what happened with Gideon. At the next obstacle, we have an entire army that is ready to fight. Why? Because they're following the guy who had the new name that, in fact, I didn't even finish reading that to you. I'll read that to you in a minute. But they started calling him by a new name. And the more battles we win, the more things we're willing to obey God in, the more people will begin to know us by that new identity. So at the next obstacle, he has an entire army ready to fight with him and ready to conquer. So then we hear what God says. God says, wait a minute. And I feel like he does this with us too. We might have won a few things and we've got a few people behind us. We've got some strength. We've got some might. We've got some power and some victories behind us. But we hear God say at the next, here's the next battle. And it's the biggest one. This is the one that's, this takes the prize. There's a term I'm trying to remember. I can't think of it, but this is the one that we will be remembered for. This is the big battle, folks. And whatever you're facing today, I've had to face them too. These battles, I promise you, this is true. I have lived this. I have done this. This works. I have come through battles because I went to the place of prayer, built an altar there. My husband has won battles this way. We have won battles together where we come together and we tear down anything that needs to be torn down and we build back carefully and we do what God tells us to do, even though in the process we are afraid. There are always going to be battles. And even though they're big and they're scary, God is preparing us. The threshing process was to prepare us. Don't be satisfied with those little battles. Don't be satisfied with just a shift in your mindset and a shift in how you're going to do things. Go after the big things. Take down those strongholds. Remove those things that have been obstacles to your victory and your freedom. Judges 7 says, so Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and his army got up early and went as far as the spring of Herod. The armies of Midian were camped north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh. The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many more warriors with you. If I let all of them fight the Midianites, the Israelites will boast to me that they saved themselves by their own strength. You might be wondering why you feel so alone. You might be wondering why God isn't letting you go asking for prayer and partnership from somebody that you think is a giant in the faith and it doesn't happen. And you want to know why. You want to know why that you don't have people coming to your rescue. And I'll tell you why. God is taking you through this process the same way he did Gideon. Even though this is an army, even though you feel equipped with these extra people, God is saying, if I let you go into battle while you're still relying on all of these other things and all these other people, I'm not going to get the glory for this. You're going to all get a wrong thought about this, and you're going to start thinking things you shouldn't think, and you're going to think that you did this, and it leads to all kinds of wrong thinking for then the next phase and the next thing that comes in our life. This is the why of the threshing. We must understand that God is the champion. He is the one who gets the glory. He expects us to grow in our faith, in our reliance, and in our trust in him. So verse 3 says, therefore, tell the people, whoever is timid or afraid may leave this mountain and go home. So get this, folks, 22,000 of them went home. 22,000 went home. He said, anybody who's afraid to fight this battle, go home. Not Gideon, of course, those who were his supporters. That left only 10,000 who were willing to fight. Your reduction, wherever God has trimmed you, wherever he has cut you off, wherever your loneliness feels like, where that's come from or how that feels, your reduction is the stripping away of any of your personal self-reliance, your personal reliance on your own strength. From the outside, it looks like we are losing. But in actuality, God is building. He is building your faith by removing all fear, the fearful, and all timidity from his life. Anybody who had fear, he said, send them home. He doesn't want that around your life. He doesn't want those speaking fear into your ears. He wants those of faith surrounding you. In other words, God had Gideon remove all who lacked faith. That this isn't something that God does to hurt us. It is something that he doesn't simply ask us to do. This is actually a requirement. God doesn't do it for you. He requires you to do it. He's not going to remove the fearful from amongst you. You have to remove them from you. You think God is hurting you, when in actuality, he's building you and he's strengthening you. If you didn't go through this process, we would continue to rely on ourselves and what we can make happen. But if you do it, yourself, you will eventually run out of resource. You'll come to the end of yourself. You will shrink back into your old patterns of thinking. So you just think, okay, that's about all I can do. I've done everything I can. And just about the time that you think you're okay, here comes the next thing, and you're not ready. You think you're ready, you're not ready. God says once again to Gideon, okay, I sent them home. I did what you asked. And we'll do this. We'll think, okay, God, I did it. I did it. Yay. And he says, okay, let's do it again. No, we don't want to do that again. What now? And this is what verse 4 says, because the process wasn't finished. There's the threshing, there's the waving and the beating process and the crushing process. It just there's more than one thing that has to be done in us. It's not a one and done quick fix. There's work, folks, and it takes consistency on our part to stay doing what the Lord is directing us to do, to stay with him. So verse 4, but the Lord told Gideon, there are still too many. Bring them down to the spring and I will test them to determine who will go with you and who will not. When Gideon took his warriors down to the water, the Lord told him, divide the men into two groups. If one group put all those who in one group, put all those who cup the water with their hands and lap it up with their tongues like dogs. In the other group, put all those who kneel down and drink with their mouths in the stream. Only 300 of the men drank from their hands, and the others got down on their knees and drank with their mouths in the stream. The Lord told Gideon, with these 300 men, I will rescue you and give you victory over the Midianites. Send all the others home. Don't be afraid of the separation process. God will use what's necessary, what's valuable, but he will remove everything that is not valuable and usable for him in your life. Don't be afraid to let it go. God's not going to remove it for you. He's going to give you the instruction. It's up to us to obey. We've got to be those who agree with God. When God gets ready to connect you where you need to be connected, be sure that he is also testing those who will join you. This test is for you to see what is in them. Have you ever been ready to do something for God with others, and all of a sudden they start having attitudes or trials come to several? This is actually for your benefit and for theirs. God wants you to see who is qualified to go with you and who is not, and why. This test was necessary, very necessary. It is the test of vigilance. God put those men through the test for this reason. Will they be ready at all times, or will they be distracted and not focused? Will they put down their swords to be refreshed, or will they be ready to stand against the surprise attacks of the enemy? Don't let this process discourage you. If God said to do what you're attempting to do and you have followed his instructions, it will absolutely come to pass. If he spoke it, that settles it. But we must agree with God by our obedience. The threshing process is God's boot camp for us. It is to prepare us for victory. Derek Prince said that we each need to be less concerned with how we see ourselves and more concerned with how God sees us. That's our identity. In Christ, each one of us is a new man created according to God in righteousness and true holiness. Viewing ourselves this way will inevitably affect the way we live. So now let's look at God's view of the odds of our victory versus man's views of the odds, okay? In our man's eyes, in natural man, we think everything is standing against us, but we need to see things from God's perspective. So I'm going to help you because I want you to see this for your life, what God's going to do for you if you'll agree with him and fight this fight you're afraid to fight. The Midianite army was 135,000 men compared to Israel's or Gideon's army of 32,000. Okay, those are the original numbers. If you write these down, you're going to love seeing these on paper to see what God does. The Midianite army, 135,000 to Israel's 32,000. That's 4-1. Okay, they are outnumbered 4-1. Then it gets worse. After sending home the fearful, the faithless, and the timid, Gideon's army is now only 10,000 men. Then it gets even worse. Then comes the water drinking test. Now there are only 300 who have passed this test. Now, Gideon's army is completely outnumbered. They went from 4-1 to 450-1. But God told Gideon in chapter 6, verse 6, and I want to remind you, folks, this is for you today, that he would send Gideon to go destroy this army in the strength he has, and that God would be with him, and that he would destroy this enemy, this Midianite army, as if he was fighting one man. So, according to God, the odds are in Gideon's favor 300-1. Instead of 450-1 against Gideon, it is now 300-1 for Gideon. And just to bolster Gideon's faith, God allows him to hear a private conversation, letting him know that the enemy was terrified of him. I'm not going to take the time today to read the actual victory. They didn't even have to begin by fighting. They had pots and torches and trumpets, and God brought the victory. The enemy was so confused, they turned on themselves. God brought the victory. I promise you, in the strength that you have, God will do the same for you. He will make it as if you are fighting one enemy, not all the stuff that you think not all the thoughts and all the troubles and all the outside. God will help you. God will do it. The enemy is afraid of you. If you will allow God to take you through the threshing process and prepare you, and you obey all his instructions, the enemy knows that nothing can stop you from doing what God has said you would do. Today, you need to determine that you are not going to be numbered with the 22,000 who gave way to fear, or the 10,000 who laid down their weapons for enjoyment, for refreshing. We want to be those who are counted among the faith-filled and the vigilant. Today, let your identity be in how God sees you. With God, all things are possible, and with God, you cannot fail. Thank you for joining me today. Be encouraged in your fight of faith. God is with you. He is working on your behalf. This threshing process will come to an end, and you will be a new man, a new woman, victorious, shed free from all the things that were unnecessary and those things that tried to inhibit you and take the thing that God wanted you to take. God will do it for you, just like he did for Gideon. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.